And process and philosophy are equally important, 0.73, in terms of the correlation. All right?
Yeah.
And this is a correlation table. The correlation table is the simplest way of finding out whether there is any relationship at all. Because what we normally do is we go through the correlation table, any of these which are zeros, we keep them in because that means it's significant. Anything that's greater than 0.05, we sort of wave our hand. If it's greater than 0.1, out. But then it will tell you anyway because it helpfully puts these little stars. If it has a little star, it means it's significant. If it doesn't have a star, it means it's not significant. Actually, if you were doing an MBA, you could stop your analysis. That would be the end of your analysis, right? That would be it. It's just correlated. Of course, it's utter rubbish, but yeah. But this basically has given us both of those types of analyses we were looking at before, which is the single index and the individual correlations. But this is only correlations so far, right? So then, what I wanted to do was look at a regression, right? So what I did was, I did the regression of the dependent variable, dv, can you see that, dv, dependent variable, and the independent variable, which in this case is the 5p index. So this is this one, this hiding behind here, right? This one. So that's the regression. Now this isn't the result, that's because, but you just need to see what it is. The r squared, or the r rather, is actually the correlation, 0.98, like we calculated before. The r squared is the square of the correlation, which is related to the regression. You can see I mentioned factor analysis. Factor analysis is also called ANOVA, analysis of variance. Sometimes it's called the same thing. Okay? And that basically, there's the significance test. It says that it's significant. Okay? These are the coefficient values, and that's actually the beta, the alpha and beta. So the constant is the alpha, and where it's got the variable name there, well, there it is, b. That's the beta value. Okay? Now that's the value, that's the coefficient. That's the t-test. And then that's the significance test. So it says that it is significant, which we expect because we saw before that the correlation was significant. But you know we have a different value. Before the correlation was minus 0.985, and this is the actual value of that. But this is also a causal relationship. Okay? Then I did another regression where I put in all of the others. Okay? Apart from one. I missed one out by mistake. Sorry. Okay. Now this gives me the correlation, but that's the before it's the individual correlation between the retention rate and the indicator. Now it's the multiple correlation between all of them and the retention rate. So it's before it was like 80 something and 0.68, 0.73. Now it's 0.99. You would expect that because it accounts for everything basically, because you've put all of the material inside. Okay. There's the ANOVA, which shows that they are significant, and here is the coefficient, right? And the coefficient on each one of them. Now, because this is fake data, the coefficient on all of them is the same, except for this one, P3, it's bigger. Okay, the standard error is the same because it's fake data, but they are all significant. Yeah. Now, because it's fake data, it excluded P5. if it wasn't fake data, you could include P5, and then you would get this is the partial elasticity. In other words, it's the partial influence of each one of the factors on the retention rate. And that's really what we want to know, right? Just so happens in this case, because I just copied it in order to make the point to show you how to do it. Yeah, it looks like that. Any questions?
So based on this research, is all the 5P is significant?
No, all of them are significant apart from 5. P5 is not, because it is excluded.
Exposed.
But it is fake data. So it's not really, not according to this research. According to my faking of the data in order to show you how to do it, because we don't have any data. But basically what I want to show is that actually it's so simple for you to do all of that. And I filled the board with...
So I would bring on the result of SPSS to my theory.
Well, all right, it's like this, isn't it? Okay. First, you want to go and find... First, you said you don't want to do development anymore.
Yeah.
Right, okay, so let's simplify this for you. You're not doing that. Right, out. Okay?
Yeah.
So the first thing you need to do is to find the measure for retention and the measure for attraction.
Yeah.
And then decide on it. Okay? Then you need to identify your target groups, companies, and then the talents. Then you need to think about your survey so that you can find the way of measuring this, and also collecting information on pay, age, qualifications, married or not, right? And then think about this issue about the questions. The questions about why did you join the company should be the flip side of the question of why did you leave the last company. Okay?
Yeah.
And then you can think about other factors as much as you want, it doesn't matter. But because you're looking specifically at Schuler, you have to have something that measures the Schuler variables. Okay? Okay. Now there's something else that we need to look at when we think about these Schuler, in this case, these Schuler variables. And that is because you're creating an instrument. And I've showed you 2 ways, there's more than 2 ways, I'll tell you some of the others, but the 2 ways I've shown you is to create an instrument where it simply has a value of 0 or 1. Yeah, do you have it or not? Right, and then the second is add them up. Goes from 0 to 5. Okay, that's the second instrument. And then the other is to say each one of them from 0 to 5 and then add them up. So the total value of the instrument would be 0 to 25. Okay, because you got 5 times 5, right?
So Schuler is suitable for the questionnaire I asked the company.
Yes.
And after that, the questionnaire for the developer, I define the factor matched with the 5P of Schuler.
Yes. But there, okay. So but there is once we've done that, we've got this data. We have to do something called the reliability test, the instrument reliability test. Okay? You can go onto the internet and have a look. Validity test. The validity test is basically saying, I have got this thing which is called my human resource philosophy. My human resource philosophy is a very intangible, subjective thing. Okay? And I'm trying to turn this human resource philosophy into a measure from 0 to 5 to say whether it's good or not. Okay? So how do I know whether that is valid? The way that I'm turning it into 0 to 5, the Likert scale, if you like, the way I'm turning it. How do I know? so we have to look at instrument validity. So I just had a quick check on instrument validity, and you can find it very clearly, all right? But basically, the question of instrument validity, I think it's here. Oops, this is a paper on instrument validity. Is this. Basically, the instrument is valid. The definition of instrument validity is the extent to which the instrument is measuring what it is supposed to measure. Okay? Now, if I have an instrument which is 0 and 1, this is easy, right? Do you have planning or not? 0, 1. That's it. Is it measuring what it's supposed to measure? Yes. You either have it, you don't, right? It's like style, isn't it? Style or personality. You either have it or you don't, right? Simple like that, right? But then, simple. But then, if you're asking about quality, excuse me, and you're asking somebody's subjective evaluation of the quality, okay, then that's not so simple. Okay, so then you have to see whether the instrument is valid in measuring the quality of the planning, the quality of the program, the quality of the policy, so on. Okay? And there are various ways of doing it. One is the simplest one is face validity. Face validity is basically, on the face of it, when I look at it, does it make sense? And if people who look at it and know about it say, yes, it makes sense, it's all right. But that's not a statistical thing. It's just a subjective thing, right? The second, this is in reverse order, right? The second is construct validity, which means how did I construct it? Okay? I used a Likert scale, but the way that I constructed it was just ask somebody. I could construct a Likert scale in a different way, right? I could ask them not to tell me is it good or not. Let's say they're planning. Or I could put a list of planning tools and I say, do you have this thing? Do you have Six Sigma? Do you have a balanced scorecard? Do you have strategic planning meetings? Right? You could have, let's say, 5 things. And if they tick 5, they get a score of 5. If they tick 4, they get a score of 4. If they tick 3, they get a score of 3. And that means I've constructed it in a different way. But the construct is formal. Okay? And therefore, the construction makes the instrument valid. So the idea of 0 to 5 is not just based on my opinion, based on the number of things that I see that you have in terms of planning. Yeah? Because if you say, my planning's really great, but then I don't see that you have any formal tools, I don't agree with you. Okay? And then the other are the content of the instrument. How much information is in it? With a 0-1, it's actually 100% information, but it's not very informative, right? With a quality index, there's more information because it's telling us not just whether they have it or not, they're telling us the quality of it or not, okay? And then finally, this is a statistical test, the concurrent or predictive validity. There is actually a test, which I think is in here. Is it in here? Yes. Cronbach's alpha. Okay, and you can do Cronbach's alpha. Let's see if we can find it. Data. I don't know. I can't see it. I can't see it. You can actually do the validity tests in here very easily. Let's see. Here, frequencies, blah, 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 blah. Can't find it. Can't find it. Let's see if it's in here. Let's do this, the descriptive statistics. Didn't tell me very much, did it? I can't find it off the top of my head, sorry. But you can do this Cronbach's alpha validity test as a statistical test, right? But in many instances, you can just first this says the same thing, basically, Cronbach testing, content validity, construct validity, criteria validity, which is the same as we've discussed before. There. Okay. Any questions? Yes.
I have two basic questions about research model.
Okay.
First, about effect factors, independent variable.
Yes.
How about the number?
Okay.
To make decision the number.
All right.
And the second, when we choose the independent variable from academic research
Uh-huh.
or make it myself,
Mm-hmm.
we have to explain why I choose independent.
Mm. Oh, I see. Okay, so first is how many,
Yes.
and the second is
Should I?
how did you choose them?
Yeah.
Okay, now let's look at the second one, because they are related.
Yeah.
In this case, he chose these because the theory says there are 5 P's.
Yes.
That's it. So the question arises, how many? 5. Why? Because his theory tells him.
Đâu
However,
đâu cần chứng minh thế đâu.
however,
Yeah.
we did put a 6th one.
Yes.
The 6 is the demographics. Remember yesterday we split it between the demographics and the topic-related variables. So the topic-related variables here is 5. But the demographics, as we discussed it yesterday, can be more than that. The demographics can include age, income, gender, married or not, qualification level, all of those things we discussed yesterday. And then that would mean that the number of variables there would be longer.
Yeah.
Now, how do you choose which ones to put in?
Yeah.
Well, the first question is, the first answer to that is the theory tells you. And then you do the statistics, and then the statistics tell you which should remain there. Because if they're not significant, you take them out.
Yes.
When you take them out, you wind up with a group that is left over. And that tells you which out of the 5 are the real ones.
Yes.
Or if you put pay and age and all of that, which, you remember I said we might be able to explain the whole thing without any of those 5. Okay? And if we have none of those 5, then that means the theory is rejected. But we're still able to explain the retention.
How about if we don't base on the academic model, but
Okay.
we may have a kind of a case study?
All right,
in
then.
order, yeah.
Okay, then you do this correlation. So first you do a general survey. The general survey says, I have no particular model. Please tell me what you think are the factors, because you are experts. So you go to the experts.
Yes.
And you can do this face-to-face, or you can do it in a focus group, or you can do an online, like we did. You just, doesn't matter. You just say, please tell me what you think are the factors. And then they send in the factors. And then you can say, which of these factors appear more often? Then I would choose those. Yeah. And then you ask the question, which ones do I retain in my model? The ones which are significant. Because in that case, you're not really having a theory to begin with. You don't have a particular theory or particular model. You're just saying, I have some ideas that these things might be important, and I've checked it with an expert group, and they have ideas that these things might be important. And so statistically, I'm just trying to uncover the things that might be important. And then in the end, that will give you a model. Because then you will say, I did analysis and I found that these 3 things are important in explaining the HR outcomes from university industry links. These things are there, and therefore that's my model. My model is basically saying these things are. And then you can go, someone else can go and test that and say, well, actually I found 4 things. So it's a different approach. One is a model-based approach, and one is a statistical approach, or a search. One is a search approach.
Or we can, can we use a case from the other companies?
Yes, but you could, because you could say, I don't have a theory, but I do have a case. In this case, this is what happened. And then you're going to ask yourself the question, did the same thing happen in other companies?
Yeah, that's right. Mọi người có thể là như vậy. Thành ra có nhiều cách để làm chứ không nhất thiết là phải chọn một cái academic.
But in each case, you've got to go through this process. Right, you've got to go through this process of putting it into some sort of structure like this, and then creating instruments for the measures. Yeah.
Using a case study and structuring that, build up the model from that case study.
You see, for economists, these things, for certainly macroeconomists like me and Paolo and so on, these things are simple, because we don't make the data ourselves.
That's true.
If we're doing a model of exchange rates, that it is what it is, right? We don't make it up. But for your case, many of these things here don't have an easy way to measure it. That's why you have to create the instrument. And you create the instrument using the survey. Sorry, I interrupted you.
In your opinion, should I change? I don't use 5P theory and change to another focus on software developer, only focus on the software company.
Okay. All right.
Excuse me.
Okay, so this is a question about basically how much work should I do? As far as I'm concerned, if you want to run a survey, you should try to get as much information as you possibly can in one go. Because you're going to spend a lot of time running the survey. Okay, so the worst thing to do is to rerun a survey. Excuse me. And since it's so simple to do this, right, I'll show you. If I want to build this correlation table, I do that, that's it. Right? And then I click on it, there it is again. And since to do the analysis, once you've got the data, getting the data in place is a bit of a pain, but once you've got the data in place and you run the analysis, you just click it, click, 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 click.
But that's my question is about should I change the theory? I don't use 5P to give another theory to focus on the software.
All right. No.
development.
Okay. So this is the question.
Yeah.
If you're doing an MBA,
Yeah.
you just need to do something very limited, very straightforward. Okay? And if you just did regression against the 5P index, that would be more than sufficient to get an MBA, provided you did the proper literature review and all of the analysis was all correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, but for a doctorate, that is not sufficient because there is no real work in it, right? Yeah, you see.
So my proposal, model and theory is okay.
Borrow the theory.
The theory, ICU, and proposal model is okay.
Yes. But yes, I mean, I have no knowledge of your thing until today, right? But if I look at what it is you're trying to do, I have already showed you that it's perfectly feasible to do it. That's not to say that there aren't things you have to take into account. There are things you have to take into account. How to measure the instrument, all of this. But there is a question as to whether you ask the company or whether you ask the software developers.
Yeah.
Clearly, there are very many more software developers than there are companies. But so therefore, you might aim to get the software developers. However, it's harder to get the software developers because you need to know them, right? It might be easier to get the company because you only need one person in the company. One person in the company, if it's a nice, well-designed survey and it's nothing that's private and confidential, they can answer the question straight away. Yeah? I mean, you're not asking them what are their strategic plans. You're just asking them, do you have strategic planning processes? Right? You're not I mean, they're not going to tell you about anything that's confidential, of course.
Yeah.
But you're not asking them anything that's confidential. You're just saying, do you have them or not? And they will say, yes. Yes, we have everything. Okay. Because you might have to look at it from the other side, which is to say, the software developer themselves, the talent, might have no knowledge of these things before they join the company. And therefore they couldn't answer the question.
Yeah.
And therefore the only real thing is pay, because they do have they do have knowledge of it. But it could be the brand of the company, for example. I think you put some of those.
But sometimes
things,
you can ask them something related to their work, but also in the criteria of description of the 5P. It's also the way you see if they know that or not. Well, for example, when you ask them if the company gives you the plan of work, it's maybe part of that is the whole plan of the company, something like that. So it's just break it into the criteria and ask them something that they related to.
Yes.
That means for the theory of 5P here, I can define to add the software developer.
Yeah, that's right. It can be translated into.
I mean, you have to give it some thought about, how you're going to collect the data. Right? What does it mean? Because it's not an easy task, you see.
No. It's time consuming.
Well, it is, but hopefully it's also interesting to do that.
Yeah.
I would hope. Let's see.
Cái phần mềm này là mình tải được không ta?
Được, hôm trước Tuyến ông cho cái link để tải về rồi mà
em đâu có đâu.
Hả? Tải đấy ở trên
Em
group á.
vào Google ấy, gọi SPS F16.
Không, nhưng
Có
mà
cả chương trình dạy luôn.
Đúng rồi. Nó
Đó,
dạy
có cả
đây
file
á,
share
dễ
này.
lắm.
Expand hả?
SPSS.
Yeah, this is SPSS.
Download về được luôn mà.
Cái này dễ mà cái này
Cái này public mà.
đầy mà miễn phí. Exactly.
Ở đây quan trọng là nó dạy video có nhìn dễ hiểu không anh?
Anh chưa xem video.
Em học rồi mà em quên rồi luôn đó.
Thì em lên em coi thử coi có dễ hiểu không, thì phải tự em mới đánh giá được chứ sao mà người khác đánh giá được là dễ hiểu hay không.
Nó còn tùy thuộc vào con trai con gái sẽ.
Hồi lúc có bằng chứng chỉ cũng mới năm 11 chứ mấy 2011.
Em 18 19 rồi.
Là
Okay.
có cái giấy học viên ít bớt luôn.
Vô chưa? Làm là chưa? Cũng làm.
Okay.
Mình làm cái này chứ.
It's good. More practical.
Tại vì thầy chỉ cho mình ví dụ.
You see, I don't know particular which statistical package you use, so I
No, normally we will use SBS as most of us.
all right.
Use that, yeah.
Because there are various other ones, Stata and all that. But if you don't know any of that, you can still use Excel.
Yeah, that's right. But it's more complicated with a lot of dots.
Well, in Excel, you have to build it up yourself.
That's right.
With this one, you
yeah.
just click on
You
it.
just take that, make it easier.
Yes.
Yeah, you just do the clicking.
Yeah.
Đây là xem bộ cái.
Ừ. Về anh phải con mẫu của anh trong cái bài nó là gì?
Đó nên thành ra là em hoàn toàn có thể làm theo cái phương án đó.
Còn gì hỏi
Dễ
không ta?
làm hơn rất là nhiều.
Nhiều cái muốn hỏi mà không biết hỏi cụ thể là gì.
Chạy nhanh.
Okay,
Yeah.
I think we're, unless you have any questions, it's a little bit early, but you know, you.
The last one. How about the reference? The number of reference.
Oh.
No limit.
There, I have honestly, there is.
Sorry.
The number is, however many is necessary.
Yeah.
That's right.
I see.
Yeah, if you do a piece of research on an area where there is very little research,
Yeah.
you will have very few references. But if you do a piece of research on an area which has been very heavily researched, you will have hundreds of references.
That's right.
And that's it. That's just the way it is.
Thank you.
Hỏi trường có gom lại cái mẫu mà các bạn câu hỏi không hả chị? Các bạn là làm còn không?
Mỗi cứ một khác nhau nhé.
Không, có nghĩa là mỗi một cái đề tài hồi xưa em học ấy là gom lại hết trơn mấy các bạn câu hỏi đó.
Thì lúc nào em nộp bài thì em phải bỏ cái bảng câu hỏi vô.
Không,
xong
có
là-
nghĩa là chỉ để bản demo thôi, còn cái phiếu kết quả mấy trăm phiếu kèm theo không?
Đó là kiểu dạng như học đại học thì được.
Học cho lại
Nghiên cứu là nghiên cứu tự
Rồi
học
em mỗi người tự làm làm gì có chuyện.
nghiên cứu cá nhân.
Em cần em hỏi Dũng á, nó nhiều mẫu lắm.
Không phải mẫu mà có nghĩa là người ta check lên rồi mà mình phải nộp lại cho trường 50 phiếu, kiểu như là tập hợp mẫu.
Người ta chỉ nộp cái bảng câu hỏi thôi.
Chứ không
còn
nộp
cái
á.
kia là em chạy trên máy.
Hồi lúc trước em dạy là thầy em nhận về luôn cái bản đó đó.
Thì đó là cái chuyện thầy em
Mình
từ
dạy
ngày
mẫu
xưa.
giáo, bây giờ nó online, lấy đâu ra phiếu.
Lấy đâu ra mà phiếu nữa mà
Nhưng mà mình có đưa đường dẫn cho người ta coi không?
Hả?
Hôm qua giờ thầy làm
chị đưa
thôi
chị đưa cái bảng Excel thôi, chị in cái bảng Excel thôi.
Mình có đưa cái đường dẫn cho người ta coi. Không cần thiết không? Không cần để cho nó kiểm tra là mình đưa cái tính xác thực hay không.
Cái đó hỏi
Bảng
trường.
Excel thôi. Cái đó hỏi trường là tốt nhất, đúng rồi đó. Nếu mà em muốn confirm thì em hỏi trường.
Tại vì không nói nữa, sau này mình không lưu
Tại vì-
lại.
Không phải, tại vì ông này không phải là, ông này chỉ là người dạy về nội dung thôi.
Rồi
Ông
hỏi,
không phải
chị
là
hỏi
người-
giùm ổng nữa mà về cái giờ không biết hỏi gì hết trơn, nhưng mà nữa hỏi rồi gửi qua mail không trả lời giùm được không?
Có người mentor chị mà hôm qua Dũng nói đó.
Ủa thì phải đăng ký với trường, thầy chỉ có dạy thôi.
Vậy chứ vậy
Em thì giống con anh ở nhà đó.
được anh lo cho đời em cũng sướng đó mà không biết anh lo không.
Thôi anh không lo được đâu.
Anh lo con anh là anh hết sức rồi.
Okay.
Đó đó.
Yes, I think it's
Okay.
yeah.
Anh cũng thấu hiểu cho Nga là vì Nga làm công nợ nhiều. Em gặp những sự từ chối liên tục như vậy. Em không nản lắm mình.
Nghề nghiệp á nó dạy em biết không? Nó phải thích nghi với bộ.
Bây giờ em mới thắng cái đầu của anh tổng của anh.
Anh nói là phong thúy nhiều thứ lắm.
Trời ơi, ba cái cuốn này dành không, nhưng mà cũng có lót ra. Đó là lúc đầu.
Hai khó nhìn lắm, cái này bóc ngang qua muốn coi giờ nào coi à.
Để cho về sớm luôn.
Cuốn này hay vô ổn biết.
Quá hay luôn, quá hay luôn, đây là tinh